The Duke gave every lady 10 names and ordered her to ruin one life. A gardener who couldn't read. A kitchen girl who often missed work to care for her sick mother. The names rested on 10 cream-colored cards arranged across a silver tray in the Ashbourne ballroom. Around them stood 12 women in silk gowns, each invited to prove she possessed the judgment required of a future duchess. At the far end of the room, Duke Frederick Ashbourne watched in silence. His estate was losing money. Creditors were growing impatient, repairs had been postponed, and the annual accounts showed another season of falling income. His advisors insisted that Ashbourne needed more than a wealthy marriage. Frederick needed a wife capable of making decisions others were too sentimental to make. Percival Graves, the estate steward, had designed the test. A household cannot survive if every servant is protected merely because his circumstances inspire sympathy, Graves explained. Each lady must choose the person Ashbourne can most easily live without. Lady Arabella Wynne stepped forward first. Beautiful, composed, and wearing enough pearls to settle several servants' debts, she selected Ruth Palmer, a widowed chambermaid with 3 children. A duchess must place the estate above private emotion, Arabella said. Graves nodded approvingly. Another lady dismissed Samuel Reed, the injured coachman whose leg had never healed properly after a carriage accident. A third chose the elderly laundry maid. Each decision was delivered with solemn expressions and carefully rehearsed words about responsibility. Then the tray reached Mary Bell. She wore a dark green gown that had already appeared at 2 previous London seasons. The sleeves had been altered, the collar had been reshaped, and the hem carried stitches so fine that only another seamstress would have noticed them. Mary was the only woman in the room without a fortune. Her late father had once served as an accountant for the Ashbourne estate, but he had died disgraced after being accused of stealing from it. Mary now supported herself by repairing gowns for women who avoided acknowledging her at social gatherings. She examined the 10 cards without touching them. How much must the estate save? She asked. Several ladies turned toward her. Graves smiled with patient condescension. I am asking how much money the dismissal is expected to save. That depends upon the servant. Then I cannot make an informed decision without seeing their wages. Frederick leaned slightly forward. Graves's smile tightened. The figures are unnecessary. They are the entire question. A quiet laugh moved through the ballroom. Lady Arabella lowered her fan. Surely a seamstress does not require an audit before dismissing a kitchen girl. Mary looked at her calmly. A seamstress learns very quickly what happens when wealthy households claim they cannot afford to pay the people who work for them. The laughter stopped. Frederick should have rebuked her tone. Instead, he found himself curious. What would you need? He asked. Mary turned to him. The wage ledgers, staff lists, uniform accounts, and repair invoices from the past 5 years. Graves stepped closer. Your Grace, this is a ceremonial exercise, not an investigation. Frederick studied Mary's expression. She did not appear frightened or eager to impress him. She simply looked as though she had been given a poorly constructed problem and refused to pretend otherwise. Bring the ledgers, he said. Graves hesitated, only for a moment. Then he ordered a clerk to retrieve them. The documents were placed on a side table. Mary sat alone while the other candidates gathered near the windows, whispering about her desperation to attract attention. Frederick remained where he was, but his attention followed each page she turned. Mary worked slowly at first. Then her movements changed. She placed one ledger beside another, compared the dates, and began making notes on the back of her invitation. What have you found? Frederick asked. 2 servants continued receiving wages after their deaths. A murmur spread through the room. Graves answered immediately, an administrative delay. Mary turned another page. For 11 months. His expression remained composed. She continued. Vale tells me it still leaks. The elderly housekeeper standing near the wall looked down, afraid to confirm it. Mary lifted another invoice. 38 winter uniforms were charged to the estate last year. I repaired 9 of the old ones myself because no new uniforms were issued. Graves's voice cooled. Are you accusing this household of fraud? Not the household. Mary drew a fresh card toward her. You were given 10 names, Frederick reminded her. Yes. And you must choose one. I have. She dipped the pen into the ink. Across the room, every conversation ended. Mary wrote slowly enough that Frederick saw each letter appear. Percival Graves, steward of Ashbourne. For the first time that evening, the steward lost his smile. Frederick stared at the card. You were instructed to dismiss a servant. Mary placed the pen beside the ledger. I have dismissed the one costing your estate the most. Graves gave a quiet, disbelieving laugh. Miss Bell has not come here to demonstrate judgment, Your Grace. Graves continued, Daniel Bell stole from this estate. When I uncovered his crimes, he confessed. His daughter has resented Ashbourne ever since. My father denied that confession until the day he died, Mary said. Then grief altered his memory. Frederick felt the old loyalty rise inside him. Graves had managed Ashbourne through his father's death, his mother's illness, and Frederick's own uncertain first years as Duke. He had been advisor, guardian, and almost family. Mary was asking Frederick to believe that the man who had protected him for 20 years was a thief. In front of everyone, Frederick picked up her card. You have exceeded the limits of the exercise and made a serious accusation without sufficient proof. The proof is already in your accounts. That is for the estate to determine. And who controls the estate's accounts? Graves's face hardened. Frederick felt every eye in the ballroom upon him. You are dismissed from the selection, Miss Bell. Silence followed. Mary looked at him for several seconds, then closed the ledger. You asked for someone capable of making a difficult decision, she said. She curtsied, turned, and left the ballroom without pleading for another chance. That night, the locked chest containing the entire monthly payroll disappeared. By dawn, guards had found a bag of coins beneath Samuel Reed's bed. The injured coachman was arrested while protesting that he had never possessed a key to the accounts room. Mary was preparing to leave Ashbourne when she saw Graves cross the lower corridor. A small brass key rested between his fingers before he slipped it into his pocket. Mary had seen the official payroll key the previous evening. This one was newer. A perfect duplicate. Mary did not expose the duplicate key immediately. Her father had taught her what happened when a powerless person accused a respected man without enough evidence. The accusation became bitterness, the questions were forgotten, and the person who spoke was punished. So she watched Percival Graves slip the new brass key into his waistcoat and continued toward the waiting carriage. Across the courtyard, 2 guards escorted Samuel Reed from the servants' quarters. His hands were bound and his injured leg dragged behind him. I did not take the money, he protested. I never had a key to the accounts room. Graves followed with an expression of practiced regret. The coins were found beneath your bed. The magistrate will decide the rest. Samuel turned desperately toward Frederick. Your Grace, I have served this family for 23 years. Frederick stood beneath the stone archway, troubled but unmoving. The evidence must be examined. By whom? Mary asked, the steward who controls the keys, the accounts, and the men who searched Samuel's room? Graves faced her coldly. I believed you were leaving, Miss Bell. I was. Then I saw an innocent man being taken away. Frederick descended the steps. You have already made your accusation. And you dismissed it. That does not make Samuel guilty. She pointed out that the payroll chest required 2 men to carry, while Samuel could barely climb the rear stairs without support. The money beneath his bed had been placed inside a clean canvas bag, although the payroll had been stored in 3 leather pouches. Frederick looked again at the frightened coachman. Release him until the inquiry is complete. Graves stiffened. Your Grace, that is my decision. The guards removed Samuel's restraints. Mary returned to her trunk, but Frederick followed her. Miss Bell, what would persuade you to remain? She turned in surprise. Why would you want me here? Because you noticed what my investigators did not. They were selected by Mr. Graves. Frederick glanced toward the steward. If Samuel was framed, I intend to discover it. And if the truth leads to the man who raised you. His expression tightened. Then I still intend to know. Mary agreed to help under 3 conditions. Samuel would remain free, she would receive complete access to the accounts. And Graves would not be allowed to select which documents she saw. Frederick hesitated. Graves had guided him after his father's death, managed the estate through his mother's illness, and taught him almost everything he knew about Ashbourne. But Frederick had nearly allowed a loyal servant to be imprisoned on suspicious evidence. Agreed. Mary refused to return to the manor as a guest. The records were brought instead to her sewing workshop above Bell's drapery, where Graves could not enter unnoticed. Frederick arrived that afternoon carrying 2 locked cases. The workshop was smaller than his private library. A cutting table stood beneath the window, surrounded by folded cloth, account books, and unfinished gowns. Several women worked nearby while a child slept in a basket lined with wool scraps. "You employ all of them?" he asked. "I pay all of them," Mary replied. Employment without payment is charity performed by the wrong person. They began with the uniform invoices. Ashbourne had supposedly paid for hundreds of new garments, yet the servants continued bringing old coats and dresses to Mary for repair. 3 separate tailoring companies appeared in the ledgers, but Mary noticed that every receipt had been written by the same hand. She placed the papers before Frederick. "These companies do not exist." He compared the signatures. "Where did the money go?" "That is what my father tried to discover." Mary produced copies of Daniel Bell's old letters. They warned of duplicate payments, missing pensions, and dead servants whose names remained on the wage lists. "Why did none of these reach me?" Frederick asked. "Because Graves controlled what reached you." "You assume he intercepted them?" "I follow the numbers. My father said he was forced to sign it. And Graves claims otherwise." "Follow the numbers until they stop allowing you to look away." Over the following days, they uncovered false uniform orders, inflated repair costs, and payments made to companies with no registered owners. Frederick began to understand how Mary saw an estate not as columns of profit but as the lives hidden inside each missing coin. He also saw the life she had built after her father's disgrace. She paid her apprentices before herself, remembered every debt, and never punished a worker simply because she held the power to do so. "You are less severe than people claim," he said one evening. Their investigation was close to proving fraud when Graves called an emergency council meeting. He produced Daniel Bell's signed confession and brought several creditors who warned that a public scandal would destroy Ashbourne's remaining credit. "Miss Bell is using His Grace's sympathy to erase her father's crimes," Graves declared. Mary placed the suspicious accounts on the table. "These payments were made to companies that have no workshops, employees, or owners. They were emergency suppliers." "Then identify them," Graves turned to Frederick. Frederick believed Mary had found something, but he feared the estate would collapse before they obtained undeniable proof. "Withdraw the accusation temporarily," he told her. Mary's expression became still. "You want me to say I was mistaken? I am asking for time. My father was asked for time while Graves destroyed his name. This is about protecting the estate. No. It is about protecting the most powerful man in the room until the truth becomes convenient." She gathered her papers. "Every time the decision threatens someone weak, you call it necessary. When it threatens Graves, you call delay wisdom." Mary left the manor and returned to her workshop. That evening, Mrs. Edith Vale arrived carrying an old black morning coat that had belonged to Frederick's mother. The lining had torn near the hem, revealing several faded blue stitches. Mary opened the seam and removed a folded note. The handwriting belonged to the late Duchess. "Percival keeps 2 ledgers. Mr. Bell discovered them. If anything happens to me, find the account hidden where no gentleman ever thinks to look." Mary looked from the blue thread to the rows of sewing boxes lining the wall. At last, she understood where the second ledger had been hidden. Mary did not search the sewing boxes at once. If Percival Graves had spent 18 years protecting his secret, he would not hide the ledger in an ordinary drawer. Frederick's mother had written that it was concealed where no gentleman ever thought to look. And the message itself had been sewn into the lining of a morning coat. The hiding place had to be connected to women's work, something men passed every day without considering important enough to inspect. Mrs. Edith led Mary through a disused corridor at the eastern end of Ashbourne Manor. Dust covered the portraits, and the shutters had remained closed since the late Duchess's death. Graves removed her papers after the funeral. Did he remove her clothes? Most of them. And her work table? Edith stopped outside a narrow door. No one considered it valuable. The room smelled of dust, lavender, and old wood. A dress form stood beneath a sheet near the window. Shelves held faded ribbons, wooden spools, and boxes of buttons sorted by size. Mary examined the drawers first. They contained nothing except brittle patterns and scraps of lace. Then she noticed the table's cutting surface. It had been covered with green felt, but one corner rose slightly higher than the others. Mary slid her fingertips beneath the fabric and felt the edge of a thin wooden panel. She lifted it. A narrow compartment had been built into the table. Inside lay a black leather ledger wrapped in unfinished muslin. Beside the official wages of servants appeared smaller columns showing the amounts actually paid. Pension funds had been transferred into private accounts. Repair budgets had been divided among companies that did not exist. Tenants who supposedly abandoned their cottages had actually been forced out after Graves secretly purchased their debts. The records began 18 years earlier, with Daniel Bell's name appearing repeatedly in the margins. Bell questioned the duplicate account. Bell refused to alter the pension figures. Bell must be removed before the annual review. Near the back, Mary found a copy of her father's final report. This was followed by notes describing how Graves had threatened to dismiss 30 servants and evict 6 families unless Daniel signed a confession. Mary read the page twice. For years she had known her father was innocent because she believed him. Now she held proof. Her hands began to tremble, but she did not cry. He asked me to protect Graves once. He did not know this existed. He knew enough to doubt, yet he still asked the person with the least power to remain silent. Edith lowered her eyes. Mary's anger was not unreasonable, but neither was it complete. Frederick had disappointed her because some part of her had expected more from him. That expectation frightened her almost as much as the betrayal. They found him alone in his father's old study, surrounded by letters from creditors. Frederick stood when Mary entered. "I was coming to find you." "You always come after the decision has already cost someone else." He accepted the rebuke. Mary placed the black ledger on the desk. "Your mother hid this beneath the cutting table in her sewing room." Frederick opened it. The longer he read, the more color disappeared from his face. He found Daniel Bell's name, his mother's pension accounts, and the private companies connected to Graves. At last, he reached an entry bearing his own signature. Frederick had approved the sale of 6 tenant farms 3 years earlier. Graves's private notes revealed that the debts forcing those sales had been invented. "I signed this," Frederick said. "You signed what he placed before you." Graves had taught him to ride, attended his lessons, and held the estate together after his father's death. Frederick had mistaken years of dependence for evidence of virtue. When he looked at Mary again, there was no request for comfort in his expression. "What must be done?" She pushed the ledger toward him. A shout rose from the lower floor. "The records room is burning." Frederick seized the ledger while Mary ran into the corridor. Flames were already climbing the staircase beside the estate office. Servants carried buckets from the kitchen, but the fire had spread through old papers and dry wooden shelves. Graves had understood that the second ledger had been found. Mary saw him crossing the courtyard toward a waiting carriage, a leather case clutched beneath. "He is leaving." Frederick handed the ledger to Edith. "Take this outside and do not give it to anyone except the magistrate." Then he turned toward the smoke. "The tenant contracts are still in that office." Mary caught his sleeve. "The roof may collapse. If those contracts burn, Graves can claim the families never held legal rights to their homes." He disappeared into the records room before she could stop him. For one terrible moment, Mary stood frozen. Then she organized the servants. She sent the stable hands to wet the adjoining roof and had the kitchen staff form a second bucket line. Samuel Reed, still limping, broke open a locked side door so 2 clerks trapped inside could escape. Frederick emerged through the smoke carrying a metal document case. His sleeve had caught fire. Mary threw her cloak over his arm and smothered the flames before pulling him away from the doorway. "You could have died," she said. "So could the people whose names were inside." Graves was arrested at the railway station before midnight. Guards found the missing payroll money in his case along with forged deeds and letters instructing creditors to seize Ashbourne land after the estate's collapse. The hearing took place 1 week later in the Great Hall. Servants, tenants, creditors, and local officials filled every available space. Graves stood beside the magistrate's table, still dressed as though he were the most respectable man in the room. He claimed the second ledger had been fabricated. He reminded the council that Frederick had signed many of the disputed orders. Frederick did not argue on that point. He stood before the entire household and placed the recovered contracts beside the ledger. "My ignorance did not steal your wages," he said. "But my authority allowed the theft to continue, and my name protected the man responsible." The hall became completely still. Frederick ordered Samuel's name cleared and publicly apologized for allowing his arrest. He restored the tenant farms and cancelled every eviction tied to Graves's false debts, and declared Daniel Bell innocent of the crimes attached to his name. Then he announced how the stolen money would be repaid. The Ashbourne hunting lodge would be sold. Part of the family's art collection would follow. The proceeds would cover unpaid wages, pensions, and compensation for those forced from their homes. One councilman rose sharply, "Your Grace, why should ancestral property be sacrificed for theft committed by another man?" Frederick looked toward the servants standing at the rear of the hall. "Because the theft was committed beneath my roof, through my authority, and under my name. I will not ask the people he robbed to carry the cost of my blindness." Mary watched from beside Edith. Frederick had not asked her to rescue him from disgrace. He had not blamed his youth, his grief, or the steward who had manipulated him. For once, he had chosen the truth before knowing whether it would preserve anything he valued. When the hearing ended, he approached her. "Your father's name will be restored in every public record. It should never have been removed." "No." He looked tired, humbled, and more honest than the man who had dismissed her in the ballroom. "I cannot undo what happened to him." "No. And I cannot ask you to forget what I did when you brought me the truth." Mary held his gaze. "No." Frederick nodded, accepting each answer without resistance. She had not forgiven him. But as the servants gathered around the posted list of restored wages, Mary understood that regret had finally become action. And for the first time, Frederick Ashbourne was no longer protecting the house he had inherited. He was beginning to make it worthy of the people who had kept it standing. The hunting lodge sold before winter. Several portraits followed, along with a silver collection that had not been used in decades. The money restored unpaid wages, rebuilt the damaged servants' quarters, and returned the first 3 tenant farms to the family's Graves had forced from them. Ashbourne survived, though not unchanged. For years, Frederick had believed preserving the estate meant protecting its land, name, and possessions. Now he understood that a house could keep every acre and still lose the people who gave it life. When the repayments were completed, he asked Mary to meet him in the Great Hall. The 10 cream-colored cards from the marriage selection were gone. In their place lay a new administrative charter prepared according to the weaknesses she had exposed. Frederick pushed it toward her. "I would like you to become the new steward of Ashbourne." Mary read the first page but did not sit. "Appointed by you?" "Yes." "And dismissed by you whenever my decisions become inconvenient." His expression tightened, though not with anger. What would make the position acceptable? It should not belong to one person. She turned the charter around and began writing amendments in the margin. No steward should control wages, hiring contracts, and disciplinary decisions alone. The accounts must be reviewed by independent clerks. Every servant should receive a written record of payment. Tenants must have representatives at meetings concerning rent and housing. Frederick listened. Mary continued. No one should be dismissed without a stated reason and the opportunity to challenge it. Widows' pensions must be held separately from estate expenses. And the workers should be allowed to report wrongdoing without seeking permission from the person they are accusing. When she finished, the margins were filled. Frederick examined the changes. "You have removed nearly every power Graves once possessed. That is the point." He took up the pen. Mary expected him to negotiate. Instead, he signed beneath every amendment. The new system was established within a month. Mrs. Edith joined the wage committee. Samuel Reed represented the outdoor staff while 2 elected tenants attended every financial meeting. The account books were no longer kept behind a single locked door, and payments were read aloud before being recorded. Frederick offered Mary the position again under the revised rules. She still refused. "I did not expose Graves to inherit his authority," she told him. "I want work that remains mine even if Ashbourne changes its mind about me." He did not argue. Mary expanded her sewing workshop instead. With a formal contract from the estate, She employed widows, injured workers, and young women who had never been permitted to learn a trade. Every order listed the price of fabric, labor, and delivery separately. Every seamstress received her own wages rather than payment being passed through a male relative. Frederick became one of her clients. He never requested a reduced price. He brought every invoice himself, waited his turn, and accepted corrections when Mary found errors in the estate's orders. Some visits lasted only minutes. Others became evenings spent discussing repairs, contracts, and the lives hidden behind each figure. He did not ask her to forgive him. That mattered more than any apology repeated too often. Months later, Ashbourne held its first public wage meeting under the new system. Frederick remained beside the table rather than at its head. When the final account had been approved, he asked Mary to stay. The room emptied slowly until only the two of them remained beneath the chandeliers. "This was where I dismissed you," he said. "I remember. I believed leadership meant choosing whom the estate could afford to lose." Mary glanced at the long table where the 10 names had once been placed. "And now I think a leader should first ask why the weakest person is always expected to pay for someone else's failure." She looked at him more carefully. Frederick reached into his coat but did not remove a ring. He placed a folded document on the table instead. It was a legal agreement guaranteeing Mary's workshop complete independence from Ashbourne. The estate could not seize her equipment, cancel outstanding payments, or claim ownership over her designs even if she refused all future contracts. "I wanted this settled before I asked you anything personal," he said. Mary read the final line. Her property remained entirely her own whether she married or not. "What are you asking? For the right to continue knowing you? Not as the woman who saved my estate. Not as the candidate I rejected. And not as someone who owes me affection because I finally did what justice required." His voice remained steady, but there was uncertainty beneath it. "I am asking whether there might someday be a place for me in the life you chose for yourself." Mary folded the document carefully. "If I contradict you before every servant and tenant in this house, will you still call me your wife?" Frederick answered without hesitation. "I would be more afraid of the day you believed you could not." For a long moment, Mary said nothing. She remembered the man who had silenced her to protect someone powerful. She also remembered the man who had later stood before his household and allowed the truth to cost him something real. One act could not erase the other. But change was not erasure. It was what a person chose to do after he could no longer hide from what he had been. "You may begin by joining me for supper tomorrow," she said. A quiet warmth entered Frederick's face. "At the manor? At the workshop?" Mary turned toward the door then paused. "And Frederick?" "Yes. Bring the revised uniform accounts. There is still an error on page 14. He smiled. "Of course there is." Mary left the hall without looking back, certain that he would follow only when invited. And Frederick had not earned her love by offering her a title. He had begun to earn it when he stopped asking others to carry the cost of his mistakes and learned to stand beside the woman who refused to let power call itself wisdom.